Hello and welcome. This is Skin Disrupted, the place where we rethink skin, aging, and everything in between. I'm Dr. Dev Patel, your host, and each episode we take a deep dive into the evidence, the innovation, and the ideas that actually move the needle. So let's begin. And today's episode truly is going to be of interest to, I think, really every human being on the planet, because it's not just about skin. It's not just about longevity. It's about health in general. It is a focus on inflammation. And who better than the amazing Dr. Victoria Manning, who is the author of amazing bestseller on Amazon, Busting the Code to Aging, How to Win the Inflammation Game, and is a self-proclaimed inflammation geek who loves diving deep into the science of aging well. A full-time aesthetics doctor and GP of over 20 years clinical expertise. She has special interest in collagen stimulation and thread lifting. She serves as a global trainer, speaker, and key opinion leader for Sinclair. And indeed, she was featured in Tatler's top 40 doctors in the UK 2025 list as best for threads, though she's equally proud of gracing the cover of none other than Dorset's Living Magazine's November issue. Fame comes in all forms, isn't that right? Oh, look, she's got that as a prop ready to go. Look, Victoria, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today. I have got far too many questions for this podcast, but I couldn't cut any of my questions out, so I'm going to fire through them and see if you can. I know you could probably spend an hour on each question, but see if you can do it in a minute and a bit, so we can try and get through as many as we can. But if you really want to get into one of them a bit deeper, go for it. Okay, so I'm going to go straight in. So you use the phrase the inflammation game throughout your book. And for listeners who may think of inflammation as purely a negative word, how do you reframe it? And what do you feel people misunderstand about inflammation when it comes to aging?
I think that's a fantastic question and a great one to start off with, Dev. I think there is a big misconception that inflammation is inherently bad. But if we didn't have inflammation, we wouldn't be here and we'd all be dead. So that's the important point. So inflammation, where it's supposed to be, is fantastic. So if you fall over, cut yourself, break a leg, we need that inflammatory process for that acute repair. But what we need is that response to basically turn off when it's done. And what happens is sometimes it goes a little bit rogue and that inflammatory process just stays a little bit longer than it should. So it's basically people having a party and the guests just don't go home and they carry on drinking till 4 a.m. And what happens then is all those acute processes become prolonged, so that inflammation doesn't go away. And that's when it basically becomes a huge driver for the aging process. And basically what we have to think about is, how do we turn that process off, and what is flipping that switch?
Okay, brilliant. So you talk about busting the code to aging. What was the moment or insight that made you realize aging isn't just about, time passing along, but a biological process that we can influence?
Again, a fantastic question. I think the light bulb moment came basically when I kind of realized that everything we were doing in aesthetics was fine as long as people were doing the right things at home. So, and I think 90% of what we do in our general life affects everything we do. And it was that moment when I thought, actually, if I'm doing a treatment, you probably feel the same, Dev, and that patient's still smoking, still drinking, still, on their Instagram feed at 3 o'clock in the morning. What I'm doing isn't going to make a huge difference unless they make those changes. So what I wanted to do was basically kind of write a book that basically encompassed that, to try and improve everything we do and give people kind of a basic understanding of how lifestyle, does change the aging process. Because if you kind of think of it like the genetic blueprint, so we have our intrinsic and all there's extrinsic aging processes. Everyone thinks that it's just the extrinsic aging, that we can change, which is lifestyle. But actually doing those lifestyle changes actually does affect our genetic blueprint. So our genetic blueprint is unfortunately what we inherit from our parents, whether it's good or bad, but it can affect. So, things like sleep, diet, stress levels, all definitely affects our mitochondrial function, which is our powerhouses. It affects our telomeres, which affect our DNA. So absolutely, everything we do in life affects our aging process.
Well, you're touching on the wonderful world of epigenetics, which I have a question about later, actually. So let's move on to the concept of inflammaging. This term, when I first came across it, it was annoying me because a lot of terms get coined, but actually I quite like the term and what it's trying to say. So this concept of inflammaging has been around for some time. But your book frames it in a very accessible and actionable way. And quite a lot of the reviews that I've read also say it's, that's something that they really liked. That it was nice, simple, pragmatic. Which mechanisms do you think are most important for people to understand if they want to meaningfully impact their biological age?
I think people need to make lifestyle changes. But I think a lot of people, when we go in to talk about longevity or anti-aging, they think it's a complete switch. They have to do a complete 360 of what they're doing to changing. And I don't know about you, if someone said I couldn't have a glass of wine on a Friday night, I'd probably kill them. So it's basically about making, I guess, little changes that are sustainable, whether that's skincare, whether it's taking supplements, whether it's going to bed and having your 7 to 9 hours kip a night, whether it's saying no to that extra email that you thought you were going to write. It's making sure that we can do consistent changes. Because if we have if we have a backbone, like a foundation of good, we have that little bit of, I guess, metabolic flexibility. So when things do go a little bit awry on a Saturday evening, it doesn't matter because the rest of the week you've been good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? That I can, in my mind, I am linking, doing that extra email at, midnight when I should have gone to bed. But I think it's breaking that thinking, isn't it? It's just someone sitting at home, maybe not with the knowledge we've got, is sitting there thinking, well, why does me answering that extra email influence my health, my inflammation? How does that even link in? Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think rather than the email, a really good one is if you have a late night snack, for instance. So you've been working, your energy levels are falling, and you just need a little bit of sugar, for instance, a piece of chocolate, just to keep you finishing that email, to go back to the email scenario. But what happens is then it basically switches what should be happening. So at night, we should be calming down. Our cortisol levels should be dropping, our melatonin levels should be rising, and we should be going into kind of relax and reset mode. Unfortunately, when we are scrolling through our emails, we are eating late at night, what's happening is that's actually switching our autonomic system into basically digesting that food rather than resetting. So we're constantly in that alert state rather than in that kind of calming down state. And it has a significant impact on the aging process.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on, still on inflammation, of course. So in practice, I see that not all inflammation is created equal. You've got acute, you've got chronic, which for lay people out there, acute and chronic, often people think just means really bad. Acute is kind of like that short-lived, it's just come on. Chronic is that more sort of low level, low grade, long term. Metabolic inflammation, neurogenic inflammation. How do you differentiate the types of inflammation that accelerate aging versus those that are actually beneficial?
Again, a really, really good question. I think if we kind of keep it really simple. So basically, I think one of the really good things is things like cellular senescence, which is basically as we get older, our cells age. And ideally, these cells should be kind of, it's a bit like a Friday when the bin man comes. They should be shoved in the bin and taken away. What happens with these cells is if it were not functioning properly, is they linger and they don't get taken away, and basically the rubbish starts accumulating. And this basically then creates that kind of inflammaging process. So these cells sometimes go a little bit rogue. They are precursors for nasties happening, like cancer cells. And they need to be taken away. So that is one of the big ones, is we're not stripping away the cellular rubbish. I think that's important. The second one, I guess you referred to it earlier, is the mitochondria. So for those that you don't know, the mitochondria, basically the little powerhouses that sit in every single cell. Some cells, depending on what they're designed to do, have more mitochondria than others. And basically the mitochondria are literally the driving force of everything, so of metabolism. So they produce all our energy, but they also are very compromised by the environment. So they're compromised by oxidative stress and inflammation. So basically, when they deteriorate, your energy production, which is your ATP, which is your kind of little molecule for making energy, decreases. Your repair mechanisms decrease. Our metabolic health decreases. So it's all basically on this decline. And then you have this imbalance between your pro-inflammatory and your anti-inflammatory pathways, and it's making sure that this balance is beneficial. And we need these mediators and these I call them pro-resolving mediators, to basically switch this inflammation off. And if they're not being switched off, this is when this lingering kind of, it's like kind of, I guess it's like a simmer, isn't it? When you put something on the boil, it's just simmering. It's not causing anything major. It's not overflowing, or it's just simmering. But that simmering is causing all this release of all these inflammatory messengers that's causing the ongoing problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, we're talking about so many aspects of our life that all link in to inflammation. And indeed, inflammation links into, I think, pretty much every disease and disorder possible. And I was giving in fact, I'll talk about that in a minute, because my next question is about in-clinic treatment. So we are going to come back to nutrition and lifestyle, because I want to leave people with a couple of nice little tidbits that they can take away and actually implement in their lives. But when it comes to in-clinic treatments, like your or my clinic, what sort of treatments would be at the top of your list when it comes to directly fighting inflammation?
I think anything that's basically calming things down. So like you, Dev, when I'm doing a consultation with my patients, I need to know about their lifestyle, because if they are metabolically unhealthy, like you, we do a lot of collagen stimulation. If we're injecting into a skin that is not healthy and isn't going to have, the vital nutrients that we need, anything we do is not going to be great. So I'm making sure that I'm addressing their lifestyle, whether it's sleep, whether it's diet. We'll come on to that later, but that's a priority. And things like in clinic, I'm a real fan of the kind of red light therapy, anything that's calming things down. And I also make sure that whenever I do anything that disrupts skin barrier, I leave the skin to repair. So all these things work by basically causing trauma at various levels to various tissue levels, to basically cause that acute inflammatory response to repair, to make better, to regenerate. But if we keep attacking that barrier, too frequently, too aggressively, whether it's with topical skincare, whether it's with ablative treatments, whether it's injectables, your skin doesn't have a chance to repair. So we have to be mindful of that. So timing is key, I think. But I also think, when we're talking about, we've gone back to lifestyle, I mentioned topicals, but topicals do have a huge part to play in what we're doing. And I think it's really, really important. And there are so many, it's like a plethora. You go into, I went into Selfridges yesterday, and literally skincare department it's overwhelming. I was like a bunny in headlights, and I'm in the industry. It's like, as an individual who's not, potentially medically savvy, how on earth are these people supposed to know what works, what doesn't work? Just because it's got pretty packaging and it has fantastic marketing, it doesn't mean it's going to be the best on the shelf. And I know you're going to touch on this a second, but you could have the best products and doing amazing things, regarding, switching the dial on information on how it works. But you don't have a multi-million-pound budget to make it work. What are your thoughts on that, Dev?
Well, you're absolutely right. And I know you've been through that journey with the skincare formulation side. And I think what most people don't realize is that genuine innovation almost never comes from big companies, big conglomerates. They buy innovation once it's already proven. And it's all very well saying, we've got head of research and development, head of this, head of that. They're titles to just feed into the marketing loop. And small science-led brands, like ours, Selderma, with the sponsor, which I will have to give a shout out in a minute, don't have the budget for the big spectacle. And, we do have the freedom to push boundaries, use high quality ingredients, and prioritize clinical results over shareholder pressure because we don't have any shareholders. It really is a David and Goliath dynamic, but thankfully David was pretty good with a slingshot. And so, yeah, and I think that was one of the hurdles you hit when you were working on a formulation, was that very thing, wasn't it? Without the money for the marketing, the big marketing, doesn't matter how good a product is, it's not going to get there.
It was really interesting. I was talking to one of our the PE company that bought us recently, who is friends with I'm not going to mention who it was, but they basically turned over 25 million last year in sales, which is huge. But they spent 18 million on the marketing. I mean, that is just for it's mind blowing. So I'm sure it's a nice product, but compared to what, and we're talking about Salderma now, compared to what that's actually doing, it's phenomenal. It was really interesting. I cited that article to you last week that you didn't even know it was in the magazine, that people are talking, clinicians are using the product because it is turning the dial on inflammation. And it'd be nice actually, because I don't personally use Salderma. The one that was cited in the Regenerative Medicine magazine, it'd be lovely to know a little bit more about how it actually works on inflammation.
Yeah, so that's the GF5, which many would call the hero product, and it's got a complex of 5 growth factors, which are actually classed as vegan, so it's bioregenerative, but they're bioidentical to human placental growth factors. But it's a next generation formula. So the original was basically that and a couple of other, minor ingredients, a couple of neuropeptides and other things. I say, look, I'm dismissing those 2 neuropeptides. Those are the same ones in a very, very high selling formula from a very big company owned by a very big group in skincare. And they've made if you go on the internet, that one is like, it's the elixir of life. And I look at it and I'm thinking, that's got the only thing in that product is basically in one of ours. And we don't even talk about those ingredients. But anyway, I digress. So it's got copper tripeptide 1, which of course is an epigenetic, ingredient, influences the expression of 4,000 genes. So again, anti-inflammatory, regenerative, repair cascades are all activated. And then we've actually got a really potent anti-inflammatory peptide in there, palmitoyl tripeptide 8, which works within about 30 seconds, actually. People who are inflamed and red will say it's cooling down. And then we've got every fatty component of the skin barrier, ceramides, cholesterol, lecithin, etc. So it really is an all-in-one skin barrier healer. And we've had people, obviously we can't make medical claims officially, it's a cosmetic product, but we've had patients in clinic who literally we've put one application on. We will scan them as well to look at their heat map, their redness, etc. We'll get them back the next day. They haven't taken the product with them. They've come back the next day and you can see marked reduction in all signs of inflammation. And they're telling you my dermatitis is better, my eczema is better, my rosacea has gone down, and that's one application. So that for us has become a huge product because people are using it, technically not as a cosmetic product for anything related to inflammation. And as you know, Victoria, everything is pretty much related to inflammation. And that's how I teach about the skincare range, about all our products. People who have been in my teaching will know and attest to this, that I say, I don't ask people about dry skin, oily skin, this skin. I'm literally trying to work out what is their baseline inflammation and how do I bring that down with anything they put on their skin. And so all our products are formulated with 1 to 15 anti-inflammatory ingredients. Even our sunscreen has probably about 12 anti-inflammatory ingredients that will work on bringing down inflammation. If you do that, the skin pretty much always gets better. So, right. So,
thank you.
Right, I digress and I move on to more questions. So, in aesthetic medicine, we do procedures that, as you say, create this acute window of inflammation. As we are, maybe just as we've been on the GF5, a debate I often have with, I've just recently had with 2 kind of quite leading laser specialists in the UK. And I've got 25 years of data on my side. But anyway, they were arguing that, we just use a bit of Vaseline, an Aquaphor, whatever else after laser, because we want that inflammation, And I said, well, aside from the fact that your patient doesn't, and they want to heal quicker, actually we don't. It's for me, it's you're triggering that inflammation with the injury you cause from a machine. But then the cascades are triggered, and then we want to close that inflammation window down, because that's when the skin is vulnerable to all sorts of mayhem and increases the risk of pigmentation and everything. So I was having this debate. I know I'm hosting this podcast, Victoria, but tell me, who's right and who's wrong here?
I completely agree with you. So yeah, most of the things we do in aesthetics, especially like the energy-based devices, microneedling, you know, whatever, they're all working by creating an acute inflammatory response, which then leads to skin repair and then obviously regeneration. And there's many people won't know this, but there are two pathways that you can go down when you do this. So, and we talk about the macrophages, which are basically the Pac-Men that munch up all the inflammatory cells. So you can either go down an M1 pathway, which is pro-inflammatory, which is what normally happens straight after injury to the tissues, because that has to happen for repair. But what we want to happen is that to switch to the M2 pathway, which is the much more pro-regenerative pathway. And the quicker we can turn that switch, the quicker we are going to get, you know, a better response. We're not going to get scarring so much. We're not going to get fibrosis in the skin. So anything we can do, in my opinion, as may be right or wrong, that turns that switch down quicker is going to do us, you know, our skin better justice. So I am with you on that. So whenever we're in clinic, so you use your Saldem, we have our, Charlotte and I have, use Skin Bureau, which again is anti-inflammatory. We will put that on the patient basically to calm down the inflammation immediately after the trauma, because basically we want to try and make sure that we restore, I guess, the epidermal barrier as quickly as possible. Because if we don't restore the barrier quickly, what happens is we lose water. It's called TOOL, which is transepidermal water loss. And when that barrier is compromised, what happens is nasty bugs can get in, you get more inflammation seeding, and it's like a pathway, it's like a loop that just constantly, you know, forward winds. So we have to make sure we can literally turn that off as quickly as possible. That's my opinion, and I think you're of the same vein.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've done some actually quite, as I said, there's 25 years of published data on this, but, you know, specifically looking at things like laser, you know, that's the most common treatment they've done the data with, and growth factors. But actually in clinic, we've done, some of our studies have had like 200, 300, 400 patients that we've done retrospective studies on. And actually we've shown 92% reduction in patient reported concerns post-procedure, the satisfaction, so looking at the final outcome, because there's this argument that, oh, maybe the results won't be as good. 7 times more patients were moderately to significantly happier with their skin just 4 weeks after one session of Morpheus 8 RF microneedling that we did it on. And that was just 4 weeks after one session, when they used growth factors along with sunscreen, as opposed to the cohort that just used sunscreen. So on all parameters that we've measured, we've seen improvements. But for me, there's no option, because if my patient's safer and they're less likely to get a complication, then there's no option here. You are using this at home, or I'm not doing your treatment. So, okay, let's go back to nutrition and lifestyle, because this is really, it's very trendy, isn't it? Look, you know, you look at now the percentage of people taking supplements and, you know, really looking at, you know, how to improve their longevity or health span, certainly. Just explain those terms to people who haven't heard them. When we talk about lifespan, longevity, we're just talking about number of years of living, really, but health span is kind of a term that encompasses the years of healthy living. So, you know, that's probably more important. We don't want to live to 200 if we're going to spend the last 100 years, you know, not able to care for ourselves and actually not have a good quality of life. So nutrition, you place a strong emphasis on diet and lifestyle, and I totally agree with you. If someone wanted a minimum viable protocol, okay, so today, simple, they just want it simple, few easy things that I can do, but I can still crack on with my life. I'm not going to do everything. The smallest set of changes that give the biggest anti-inflammatory return, what would you choose?
Dr. ultra-processed foods.
Amazing. Okay. So again, to explain to people, ultra-processed, look at the label, right? When you look at the label, I mean, if something hasn't even got a label, like an apple,
It's fine.
it's from the ground. If there's lots and lots of stuff on the label, right, Victoria? we know there's probably some bad stuff in there. And I've tried to look at labels. I look at labels for everything. And I'm still today sometimes shocked at what the marketing makes you believe, because it's clever marketing, right? And how they use wording on the label to make you think, no added sugar, but the brain just sees no and sugar. Yeah, I've marked people, and they go, "This hasn't got any sugar," and I said, "No, it's got no added sugar because there's already 30% sugar." And there's so many things, right, that are like that. So I think people need to read the label.
Yeah, it's a really important point. So basically, our diet has changed dramatically from when our grannies used to do the supermarket shop. And basically, you are quite right. It's marketing. So it's much better for a loaf of bread to be able to sit on a shelf for a month or even, so it doesn't, go past its sell by date. It's still going to be okay to eat, But back in the day, when our grannies, went to the bakers, you have to have that bread within 24, 48 hours. Otherwise, it would start growing mold. My husband always jokes because I have things at the bottom of the fridge that are literally growing their third course penicillin. I says it hasn't killed me yet, but yeah. So basically the food industry is killing the population. It is basically using preservatives, additives, words I can't even start to actually pronounce, to make our food taste nicer, become more addictive, and have a longer shelf life. So it's like when you have a crisp, but they have that kind of sugary, soury, whatever it is, that when you bite into it, you get, oh, that's nice, which makes you want another one. It's all about those dopamine triggers of actually trying to get us to eat. And it's dangerous, and it is literally killing the population, really.
Yeah. Do you know, I know this applies to everyone, but particularly when I get patients with significant skin concerns, acne, for example, that's absolutely the first thing I hit on. And what's interesting is when I did my diploma in practical dermatology or whatever in 2005, I remember in the module there on acne, there was hardly anything on diet. And there was, now I'd love to look at the module now, 20 years on, for that same course. But there was, it was almost nothing, and it was like, that there isn't really much evidence. There might be, but I still remember there was a line where it said sugar and processed foods. And so we've known for a long time. And the first thing I say to patients with acne is, what are you eating? What are you eating? And we need to clean up the diet. And of course, sugar, which you've touched on, is another. I have a sweet tooth, and I do eat sweet foods, and I enjoy them. However, I always tell myself I'm having my dose of poison right now, because that's
a really interesting thing, and that gets us back to information. So basically, when we eat sugar or refined carbohydrates, if you even eat white bread, even your mouth, it tastes sweet because it's basically switching to sugar. What happens is you're going to get a glucose spike. And what happens after a glucose spike is our body doesn't like glucose in the body. So it releases insulin to basically try and normalize that glucose. So if you have like a chocolate bar, I know this happens to me because when I've done my glucose monitoring, I'm fascinated by it to actually see what foods affect me. Thankfully, red wine doesn't. But it literally, it spikes. And what happens when it spikes is that basically down the line causes inflammation. And if you're constantly doing this kind of peak and trough all the way, you're getting this massive inflammation. And what happens is, it's especially important in today's kind of environment. People are on, the GLP-1s and the GIPs, the Mounjaros, whatever, the Ozempics, is they are losing a lot of weight, but they're also losing muscle mass. And muscle is so important for storing glucose. So if we're not preserving the muscle and we're not eating enough protein, that sugar's got nowhere to go. So what happens is that sugar then gets converted into fat, goes and gets converted around our visceral, organs in our tummies, and that basically becomes an inflammatory powerhouse pumping out. So we've got all these things that are working against us the minute you eat that chocolate bar. So it's lots of things we need to kind of take into consideration before you eat that chocolate bar.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something with the GLP-1s alone, haven't you? I think in 20 years we're going to see really what was the fallout from that. I think they're an amazing drug. It's an amazing drug and used right. But of course, I think lately most people coming to my clinic, or it feels like that, probably not most people, but a lot of people coming to the clinic, when I ask them now directly, are using the GLP-1 drugs. And I don't think many of them are doing the weight bearing exercise and the weights and everything else to try and keep up that muscle mass.
And it's really important, actually, when you're going back to the GLPs. I was reading an article last night about, are they anti-inflammatory? Because there's a lot of data about it. At lower doses, when it's sustained weight loss, your low doses, and you are maintaining muscle, you're doing your resistance exercises, you're eating, people don't realize how much protein they have to actually eat. So for me, I'm 65 kilos. I need to be eating more than 100 grams of protein a day, which is actually a lot of protein. And then, and when you're on the higher doses and you're doing this dramatic weight loss, you're actually getting a slightly more pro-inflammatory process, because you're getting that massive weight loss with the ketosis, the breakdown of everything, but you're also losing muscle mass. So it's actually not anti-inflammatory. So we need to make very sure when we're talking to our patients about this, what is actually the processes that are happening, and making sure they are doing everything we ask them to do.
So I have to ask about supplements. There's a lot of noise online about supplements for inflammation. And from your perspective, which ones truly have evidence behind them and which are overhyped, particularly around the inflammatory topic?
I am an absolute advocate for omega-3. So basically, we were going back to the diet. Our diet, because of ultra-processed food, is very heavily omega-6 rated. So that's kind of things like all your seed oils, your processed foods. They're all whammed with, obviously, omega-6. Now, omega-6 is great, linoleic acid, we need it. But it's when the balance is wrong. And people don't eat enough kind of fatty fish. So your sardines, your mackerels, your salmons. And it has to be wild salmon, a wild fish. Because if you're eating basically farmed fish that are shoved through with shed loads of kind of antibiotics, toxins, whatever, there's no point eating it. And we can't physically eat enough of that fish to actually maintain, our balance. And and why is omega-3 so important? So, two reasons. One of the main reasons, it helps our cell membranes. So it stops the cell membranes being rigid. So it lets all the bad stuff out and all the good stuff in. So we need to be making sure that we're looking after that. Obviously, EPA and DHA make up a huge amount of our brain. So it's basically cognition. It helps with aches and pains. It also stimulates sirtuins, which are a group of mediators that basically turn down and actually switch off inflammation. So for all of them, in clinic, I actually test my patients. I actually look at what their ratios are. And I also look at the omega-3 index, which is it's starting to come more mainstream, which is actually looking at your cardiovascular risk. So ideally it should be above 8. Most people's is less than 4, which puts you in a high risk for having, problems with your heart. So for me, omegas are the bee's knees.
Okay, I've learned something then. Balance is the key, isn't it? I think a lot of people hear this is good, and they don't realize that it is about balance. We've got a device in clinic, quite an innovative ultrasound device that rebalances a protein called caveolin-1 in the skin, which is particularly associated with the dermal white adipose tissue layer, which again, both these things have only been identified in the last 20 years or so. And interestingly, in acne, 4 out of 6 types of rosacea, psoriasis, various skin issues, the level is very high, whereas in aging, it drops down all the other way around. I'm getting confused this time of the morning, but either way, the levels are off balance. And this device is about bringing the levels back into control. And that's what a lot of people don't appreciate. And, a lot of these new things coming out, peptides and other things, I think people aren't appreciative that the body runs on everything being in balance, right? Your pH goes up, goes down, you die. Your temperature goes up, goes down, you die. There's this, I'm not saying people think die with golf taking supplements the wrong way, but we need to think about the harm we can do with something that might be good. So omega-3. So if, what's my best way of getting omega-3?
Message me.
How do I know?
But it's basically making sure that you're using the right formulation, and the fact it's mixed with polyphenols as well, because that stops the fish oil going rancid, and it basically keeps it from oxidizing.
And for someone who does eat fish, how do I know it's wild fish? I'm in the supermarket.
You know.
Okay. Thanks.
No, you do. They should say on the tins or the fish that it's farmed. But if you're buying fresh fish, you're not going to know from the Waitrose counter whether it's being farmed or whether it's fresh. They're not going to. They're not going to know.
Well, luckily I'm in Portsmouth, so I can go down
The fishmongers and actually get it fresh. Yeah, likewise, I live in Lymington, but actually we don't actually have a fishmonger, and we're a seaside town. Mental.
Wow.
Absolutely mental. Before we move off supplements, there's one thing I think, and I know you haven't actually put a question on this, but I'm going to bump in here because I think it's really important, especially as you do so much with inflammatory skin like rosacea, acne, Dev, is gut health. Gut health is so important. So, if our gut isn't working as it should be, and it's we call it dysbiosis, which means we have too many bad bacteria and not enough good, anything we do in aesthetics is not going to work because of obviously the gut skin connection. And the gut obviously is, it's our second brain. So there is also a gut brain connection, which affects our mood, our serotonin levels. But also if our gut is inflamed, our skin is going to be inflamed. So I don't know about you, when you're treating patients with inflammatory skin conditions, do you look at their gut too?
So interestingly, in terms of actual testing, no, we don't. And I have come across a couple of colleagues who are now doing these various tests. And I took a step back. Sometimes, when all these tests come out, we have to challenge and question what's actually going to help and what's just a gimmick, to make the patient think that we're doing something there. So that's the first thing. So again, a side chat with you will be great on that. So no is the answer. Are you talking about doing a stool test and then have...
I just generally, when I'm talking to my patients, I ask, I talk about their diet. Are they taking prebiotics or probiotics? Are they doing anything that's to try and normalize their gut health? Yeah.
So the answer is, I should be talking about it with every patient. I don't. And I think it comes down to time, in a consultation. But there's certainly where people have got the skin concerns, the acne, the rosacea, they all get the gut chat. And then if I have time with other patients, and so often I don't, then I will talk about gut health. I focus on sleep first, actually. So sleep is my kind of everyone has to hear me harp on about sleep. And I myself, I do take prebiotics, I take various, a bacterial culture thing in a capsule. What else do I do? I use a low-level laser, actually. So I've got a low-level laser, which is red and violet light, which should give in the clinic, and it's never earned a penny for us in the clinic because I have it at home. And I do a 2-3 minute program on my vagus nerve, which, as you know, speaks to the gut and every other organ and says, calm the hell down.
That is the best device. I bought myself a NeuroSim 4 months ago. And that's basically, it goes on your tragus, so the ear, and basically I do it 30 minutes driving to work, 30 minutes driving home, and it's basically a rest and reset. It just turns the dial down of your sympathetic nervous system. And interestingly, my poor hubby flipped into atrial fibrillation 8 weeks ago, quite out of the blue due to stress. And I said, I want you to use this device. Within a week, he flipped himself back into sinus rhythm. So I am a believer.
And that's the thing, you see, we're in a day and age where even medical practitioners, I find, have this huge blind spot, and their knowledge base just isn't willing to accept that this. And I'm like, this isn't voodoo medicine, right? The biggest, how do you, breath work? That's essential. Yeah, vagal nerve stimulation. And my mother, who's been practicing yoga for 40 years, has been telling me about this for years. And did I listen? But actually, when I was giving a lecture on low-level laser in Belgium, I think, I had to do a big literature search. And there is so much published data on the vagus nerve and inflammation and how it's connected to everything. They did a whole big study on people with depression. and showed that inflammatory markers were significantly higher in every subject. And when this was brought down, lo and behold, the depression improved. So it literally is, coming back to inflammation, linked to pretty much every system, isn't it? So I need to get one of those devices, because that's something you're probably more likely to do, every day. Yeah. So, right, menopause. I want to talk about menopause because, rightly so, it's now coming more and more to the fore. You touch on perimenopause and menopause in your work as well. And how do hormonal changes amplify inflammatory pathways? And what do you wish every woman understood earlier in life?
That's a great question. And to be honest, most of my patients are either peri or menopausal or postmenopausal. As you know, estrogen is very anti-inflammatory. So while we have, estrogen pumping around our bodies, happy days. Unfortunately, when we start going through the perimenopause, what happens is it's doing this, and we know that the spikes are not great because that obviously causes inflammation. And as we go through, obviously, the perimenopause as well, our estrogen receptors in our skin decline. So we are not making as much collagen as we previously were. And our enzyme, the MMPs, which are the chompers, as I call them, which are the breaker downers of the elastin and collagen, are working overtime. So constantly you're chasing your tail of trying to actually, improve the collagen in your skin, which is why, our patients in their 40s suddenly go, this arrived in the post overnight. What are you going to do about it, doc? And that's why. So obviously with the decrease of estrogen, we have this much more pro-inflammatory kind of skin, which we need to address. And it's also why I kind of talk to my patients when they're in their 30s. I kind of consider their skin like a bank account. They need to constantly make, deposits into this bank account, whether, you're a believer in collagen supplements or you're doing collagen, stimulation treatments, whether it's through energy-based devices, whether it's through injectables, it doesn't matter. But you need to be banking this collagen, because when you get to the menopause, it all goes Pete-tong and literally declines overnight. And so we've got this, the skin issues going on, but also due to in the menopause, we become metabolically more unhealthy. You see it greatly in men as well. In the menopause, when they have a reduction in testosterone, for instance, their cholesterol scoots up. So they are much higher risk of, cardiovascular disease. But you put them on testosterone, their LDL comes down, happy days. So we need to be kind of thinking about the whole kind of metabolic kind of issue as well. And people in the 40s, they suddenly get that that kind of tummy that they just can't shift no matter what they're eating, whether they're going to the gym. And it's basically all due to this metabolic crap that's going on in this time.
Okay, amazing. I want to move, just because of time, and we're going to have to we're coming towards the end. I want to just hit on one or two questions. Before I do that, I'm just going to give a formal shout out to our sponsor, Cellderma, which we've touched on, manufacturer of GFI, because without Cellderma sponsoring these sessions, we couldn't do them. And as the founder of it, I can say it really, Cellderma has become about bringing honesty back to skincare. And when truly we can put patients or consumers, users first, above profit, decisions are made by putting them first, product first, not profit, then, well, it makes it even harder, as you and I both know, but it really does end up meaning that you can truly say you've got the best products that can surpass anything else that's on the market, because you've done things how they should be done. So thanks to Cellderma and the whole team. Some of them are here, so thank you. I'm going to go back to asking, I want to touch on epigenetics. I talk a lot in my work about epigenetics, spoke about it recently in Dubai at MWC, essentially how lifestyle and environment whisper to our genes. You mentioned about inflammation interacting with epigenetic aging. So I just want to delve into that a bit more. So can you just explain to the layperson, what are we saying here? What are we actually saying that inflammation does? And then what we change, i.e. what we do that influences inflammation and then influence those genetic factors?
Great question, Dev. You say that lifestyle is whispering to our genes. I say it's shouting merry hell at our genes. And we know that, I've done telomere testing. So these telomeres are basically in our DNA. They're on the chromosomes. They're little caps of the chromosomes. And we know with aging, these get shorter. And it's one of the things we're looking at when we're testing is actually what's your telomere age against your actual age. And I've done kind of things when I've actually put patients on a kind of a protocol and actually recheck them, 6 months later to actually see, what's going on. And there are changes. So we can, by making lifestyle modifications, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, Dev. Sleep is one of the biggest things that people think, oh, I can sleep when I'm dead. Yeah, you can, but you'll die sooner. Sleep is one of those things that's not, in my mind, is non-negotiable. So if I don't get my 7-8 hours sleep at night, A, I look not great in the morning, and B, all my repair processes, including your skin, because we know in the middle of the night, that's when our sleep is paramount, because that's when we're doing our massive repair. And it's why we use things like all our actives at night, because you get better absorption. If we're not getting the sleep, but that's going to have a huge impact. We already talked about stress management. Again, that's huge, because if we can reduce our cortisol, that reduces inflammation, which will then start whispering less to our genes to actually, not age quicker. We've already talked about diet, we've talked about supplements, and we've talked about hormones. So all these things, and skincare, because we can't forget skincare, because that has a role as well, because anything that we can do topically and environmentally to reduce like the reactive oxygen species, which are the ones that make our cells go rogue, is a good thing, and will have a definite impact on our epigenetics.
Absolutely. And then that's I can see another podcast happening, by the way, but with you and me. But actually, there's now quite strong, convincing, emerging evidence, as you'll probably know, that if we can actually switch off some of these processes and turn down this inflammation and help with cellular senescence, etc., with truly regenerative topicals, that actually then those healthier cells will then release the right signals to cells inside and actually help with your internal aging and other organ health. And I know there's some research going on in Lisbon University around that for the last 5 to 10 years, which is showing almost quite conclusively, I think, that is a case. So truly working on your face could help with your insides as well. So if listeners, just to conclude, if listeners had to take just one message away from your book, one thing they can do today, I was going to ask what would it be, and I think you've kind of said that already, which is the ultra processed food. So I'm going to switch this now, and I'm going to ask, give me 3 top things: ultra processed foods, sleep. What else is it going to be?
Over the 3.
Okay, I knew it. Okay, so if you've been listening, watching today, and there's 3 things you want to take away, look at the label, try and cut out the stuff where there's loads and loads written on the label, especially all the additives and the sugars, etc. Sleep, minimum 7 to 8 hours. And what was the other one? Omega-3. Okay. Omega-3. Okay. And what we will try and do is put some links in the blurb when we put this out on Spotify, etc. I will like to, just before I forget, say that if you want to buy Victoria's book, strongly recommend it. There it is. That's what the cover looks like. You can go to Amazon. Most people have an account on Amazon. And she's also on Instagram at Dr. Vix, VIX. Manning, MANNING. So do give her a follow, and you can see more of what she's up to. Victoria, thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been fascinating. I could have asked you 10 questions of each answer that you gave me. I do think we should do another episode, probably in about a year's time or so, in a catch up and see where we are. Things will have changed. Things are moving. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dev. Lovely to speak to you.